Amarachi had worked in the Abadike household for 2 years. At 19, she was quiet, diligent, and known for the respectful way she moved around the compound. She woke before the rooster crowed, swept every corner of the house, washed dishes until her fingers wrinkled, and still managed to greet everyone with soft humility. Even the neighbors praised her discipline. Whenever they saw her carrying a basin of water on her head, they often said, "That girl is well trained." Any mother would be proud of her. But to Chief Abadike, none of that mattered. Chief was a man whose ego entered a room before his body. With his swollen stomach, loud voice, and expensive igbada, he carried himself like a man untouched by consequence. Amarachi avoided him as much as she could. She had learned early that the less she spoke in his presence, the fewer insults she received. One humid evening, after serving dinner and clearing the plates, she heard raised voices from the sitting room. She moved quietly, intending only to pick up the empty water jug, but the sharpness in the voices made her pause behind the curtain. She recognized Chief's voice immediately. "Debt is debt," his brother snapped. "That beggar you humiliated last year? His uncle is demanding restitution. The matter is no longer small. If you don't settle this, the elders will step in." Amarachi frowned, clutching the jug against her chest. She remembered the incident they spoke of, the day a thin young man had come to the compound begging for food. Chief had run him off like a stray dog, shouting insults that echoed across the neighborhood. She had felt sorry for the boy but could do nothing. Chief spat loudly. "Nonsense. Me? Abadike of Yumuz? I will not give them a kobo. Who are they to threaten me?" His brother lowered his voice, but the anger in it was unmistakable. "You don't understand. That boy's uncle is a respectable elder. The humiliation you caused has spread. People say your pride has spoiled your sense." "Let them talk," Chief barked. "Talk cannot injure me." "Then give them something else," his brother said, each word dropping like a stone. "They asked for the girl." For a moment, all Amarachi heard was the soft buzzing of the electric bulb. Her heart thudded against her ribs. The girl? Which girl? But deep down, she already knew. She stepped backward slowly, her breath catching. Her mind raced. They couldn't be talking about me. Chief wouldn't dare, would he? That night, the compound felt colder than usual. She finished her chores quickly, her fingers trembling as she washed the last plate. The sky was heavy with clouds, threatening rain, as if nature itself sensed the trouble brewing. Just as she made her way toward her small servant's room, she heard Chief's commanding voice. "Amarachi. Come here." Her feet froze. She turned slowly, forcing herself to walk back into the sitting room. Chief sat with his legs spread wide, his face dark with the kind of satisfaction that comes from making decisions no one can challenge. "You sent for me, sir?" she asked quietly. Chief studied her for a long moment, his eyes cold and measuring, as though she were livestock he was preparing to hand over. "You owe me loyalty," he said finally. "And now, you will repay it." Amarachi swallowed hard. "Sir, I don't understand." "You will marry the beggar's nephew," he announced, as casually as if he were ordering more firewood. "The elders will witness it tomorrow." Amarachi felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Sir. I'm not even, I don't." "Silence," Chief thundered, slamming his palm on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. "Your marriage settles my disgrace. You should be grateful your life is useful at last." "Grateful?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her body trembled from the force of holding back fear and shame. She felt small, powerless, swallowed by the weight of Chief's authority. He waved her away with the flick of a hand. "Go and prepare yourself. This is not a discussion. It is a command." She backed out of the room, barely able to breathe. The hallway felt longer than usual, stretching endlessly before her. When she finally reached her small room, she shut the door and leaned against it, sliding down until she sat on the floor. Outside, thunder rumbled. Wind pushed against the thin window frame. Inside, she folded her knees to her chest and let the tears fall, silent at first, then uncontrollable. She pressed her palms against her face, trying to smother the sound. Her life, her dreams, her small hopes, everything had been exchanged like a piece of property. Eventually, she whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking, "God, what did I do to deserve this?" No answer came. Only the steady drumming of rain against the roof, like the echo of her helplessness. She wasn't grateful. She wasn't willing. She was terrified. The next morning, before the sun had fully claimed the sky, a crowd had already gathered in the village square. The air was thick with the scent of dust and anticipation, and the restless murmuring of villagers rose and fell like waves against the wind. Everyone seemed to have left their chores unfinished, eager to witness the scandalous event, Chief Obadiah forcing a maid to marry a beggar. Women stood with hands akimbo, men folded their arms across their chests, and curious children craned their necks from behind their mothers' wrappers. Amarachi walked between two elder women assigned to guide her, though it felt more like escorting a prisoner. Her feet felt heavy, each step echoing with disbelief. Whispers swirled around her like dust in a storm. "That's her? The maid? She's too young for this kind of punishment. Why force her to marry a beggar? What kind of restitution is that?" Chief Obadiah has finally lost his sense. Some people pointed at her discreetly, others didn't bother to hide their shame on her behalf. Amarachi kept her eyes fixed on the ground, afraid that if she looked up, she would break down in front of everyone. A few meters away stood the supposed beggar. Chike. He was tall but painfully thin, as though life had stripped him of everything except bone and endurance. His faded shirt hung loosely on his shoulders, and the trousers he wore had been patched so many times it was impossible to guess their original color. A pair of cheap slippers barely clung to his feet. She remembered him vaguely, how he sometimes appeared near the market, holding a wooden bowl, not demanding, but quietly pleading for any kindness people could spare. He never looked directly at anyone. Even now, he shifted his weight awkwardly, unable to raise his eyes to meet the villagers' stares. He didn't look at her with pity or desire, only with shame, the kind that settles deep in the bones. When the elders called them aside for a brief moment, Chike finally looked up at her. His eyes were tired, burdened by a responsibility he had never asked for. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the murmurs. "My uncle, he forced this. They say Chief must learn humility. They want him disgraced the way he disgraced me." Amarachi swallowed. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, and she locked her fingers together to hide it. I don't know what to do," she whispered back. Chike lowered his head. "If I could refuse, I would. But they told me my family will be cast out if I disobey." Before either of them could say more, the elders approached. The oldest among them, Elder Nana, cleared his throat loudly. Though he spoke with authority, his expression was stiff, uncomfortable. Many elders disapproved of the union, but tradition often demanded obedience over compassion. "Let the ceremony begin," he declared. The crowd grew silent. They were positioned before a small stool draped with white cloth. No decorations. No joy. No music. Nothing that resembled a celebration, only the bare necessities required to make the marriage binding. The ceremony was brief, cold, and without joy. There were no prayers for happiness, no blessings for fruitfulness. The elders recited the words mechanically, as though eager to finish a task that left a bitter taste in their mouths. Amarachi repeated her responses with a voice she barely recognized as her own, hollow and strained. A few sour smiles flickered among the spectators, people who loved gossip more than justice. Others watched with sympathy, some with silent anger. but no one stepped forward to stop it. Then came the tying of wrists. A white cloth, symbolizing unity, was wound around their wrists by Elder Nana. His hands shook slightly, not from age, but from dissatisfaction. Amarachi felt the cloth tighten around her skin. It felt like a rope pulling her away from the life she knew and toward a future she had never imagined. Some women cried. Their sniffles broke through the silence. Not for Chaik. Not for the elders. But for her, the girl who had cooked their meals, carried their water, greeted them respectfully, and now stood trembling beside a man she barely knew. When it was done, the crowd began to disperse. People shook their heads, whispering about the cruelty of Chief Abadike. And speaking of the chief, he simply dusted his hands and turned away. No farewell. No apology. Not even a backward glance. He walked as though discarding a burden he had long grown tired of carrying. Amarachi watched him leave, numb and shaken. She felt abandoned by the man who stole her future and then walked away as though she were nothing, just a servant whose life existed for his convenience. Chaik, noticing her trembling, leaned closer and whispered softly, "You don't deserve this. None of this should have happened." His voice held something surprising, gentleness. Amarachi didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat felt blocked, her heart too heavy for words. She simply stood there, feeling the weight of the white cloth around her wrists, the weight of the villagers' stares, the weight of a life she never chose settling heavily on her shoulders like a storm cloud refusing to move. Chaik led Amarachi along a narrow path that wound past tall elephant grasses and scattered palm trees. The villagers had already dispersed, leaving behind a trail of whispers that clung to the air like smoke. The white cloth that had bound their wrists during the ceremony had been removed, but Amarachi still felt its ghostly pressure on her skin. She walked silently beside him, her steps unsteady, her mind swirling with fear, confusion, and the faintest flicker of curiosity. Chaik did not speak. He walked slowly, not wanting to startle her, not wanting to rush her into the reality he himself had never fully accepted. When they reached the edge of the village, he gestured toward a small structure leaning slightly to the left. It was more of a hut than a house, its mud walls cracked from years of neglect, its thatched roof sagging, and its wooden door barely clinging to its hinges. "This is where I stay," he murmured, ashamed. Amarachi said nothing. Her eyes scanned the hut cautiously, bracing herself for a harsh new life. As they crossed the threshold, the dim interior revealed a frail old man sitting on a low bamboo bed covered with a thin wrapper. His breathing was labored, his cheeks sunken, his gray beard patchy and unkempt. When he saw them, he struggled to rise but only managed to push himself upright against the wall. "Chaik," he called in a voice rough with age and pain, "bring the chest." She must know. Chaik hesitated. "Uncle, she's tired." "Let her rest." "No," the old man insisted, lifting a trembling hand. "There are truths she must hear before fear fills her heart." "Show her. Now." Reluctantly, Chaik walked to the corner of the room and dragged out a small wooden chest. Its edges were worn smooth from years of use, and a thin layer of dust clung to the lid. He placed it on the floor and opened it slowly. The chest creaked loudly, a long, aching sound that seemed to carry the weight of many buried years. Amarachi leaned in cautiously. Inside were neat stacks of documents, old but carefully arranged. Certificates with embossed seals. Examination results. Letters of recommendation. And photographs, dozens of them, each capturing a different chapter of a life she would never have imagined belonged to the man beside her. In one photo, Chaik stood on a stage, wearing a graduation gown, shaking hands with a university official. In another, he wore a pristine white lab coat, smiling proudly among a group of medical students. There was even a faded newspaper clipping praising him for winning a community health project award. Amarachi gasped softly, pressing a hand to her mouth. These were not the belongings of a beggar. These were the remains of a dream. Chaik's voice came low and steady, though tinged with unspoken sorrow. I wasn't born a beggar, he said, his eyes fixed on the chest. I studied medicine. I wanted to become a doctor. I wanted to help people. I had dreams, real dreams. He paused, swallowing hard as memories surfaced. But everything changed so fast. My father died suddenly. Our only land was seized in a family dispute I didn't have the strength or money to fight. And then my uncle, he nodded toward the old man, fell seriously ill. There was no one else to care for him. He reached into the chest and lifted a photograph of himself holding a medical award, his face radiant with hope. I abandoned everything. My final exams. My internship. My future. Amarachi watched him, barely breathing. She had never imagined such a story hid beneath the ragged clothes and weary eyes of the man villagers called a beggar. Chaik continued, sliding the photograph back into the chest. I thought it would be temporary. I thought I could work, save money, start again. But illness is a deep well, Amarachi. The more you pour into it, the more it takes. And with no land, no family support, no job, survival became my only goal. He lifted the wooden begging bowl from a shelf and held it up with both hands, as though it were a symbol of defeat. Begging was never who I was. It was shameful. But what choice did I have? Amarachi blinked rapidly, her vision blurring. She looked from the bowl to the chest, then to Chaik, truly seeing him for the first time, not as the villagers saw him, not as Chief Obadiah had used him, but as a man whose life had been carved by grief and sacrifice. A man who had lost everything yet still stood with quiet dignity. Chaik looked at her slowly, fear flickering in his eyes. I don't want a wife who was forced on me, he said softly. You don't belong in this life. When you're ready, you can go back to your own. I won't stop you. His voice wavered on the last words, as though part of him hoped she wouldn't leave, and hated himself for hoping. The old man watched them silently, his eyes glistening. Amarachi felt her chest tighten. She thought of Chief Obadiah walking away without a backward glance. She thought of the villagers whispering. She thought of the humiliation of being treated like an object to be traded. But then she looked at Chaik, gentle, wounded Chaik, and something inside her shifted. She stepped closer, her voice a whisper that surprised even her. No, Chaik looked up sharply. Amarachi swallowed and repeated, stronger this time, no. I'm not going back. Not to that house. Not to the man who threw my life away like rubbish. She placed her hand over the chest filled with memories and dreams. Let's build a new one, together. Chaik stared at her, stunned. The old man exhaled shakily, relief washing over his tired face. For the first time since morning, Amarachi felt a strange peace settle into her bones, uncertain, yes, but real. Because in that moment, she realized something Chief Obadiah would never understand: dignity is not in wealth, and character is not in status. Chaik was a man broken by sacrifice. She was a girl broken by injustice. Two fractured lives had been forced together against their will. But perhaps the same fate that had wounded them had also aligned their paths for a reason. And maybe, just maybe, it intended to heal them in each other's arms. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Folktale by T Vibes.